Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, April 5th, 2023. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy hosting a meeting with the President of Taiwan and a bipartisan group of members of Congress at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in California, talking about bonds of friendship that unite the U.S. and Taiwan, as China strongly condemns the meeting, warning it would most likely take necessary and resolute actions in response to the unwanted situation. China considers Taiwan to be part of China. Coming up, we hear from Speaker McCarthy and the Taiwanese President and talk with Associated Press Chief Congressional Correspondent Lisa Mascaro. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he has no doubt that Russia has wrongfully detained a Wall Street Journal reporter who was arrested last week on spying allegations, but the State Department is still in the process of making that determination official. Chicago has a new mayor after Tuesday's runoff election. We'll hear from the winner, Brandon Johnson, a Democrat, and the candidate he defeated, Paul Vallis, also a Democrat. And in Wisconsin, a Supreme Court justice election on Tuesday, switching the balance of power on that court from conservative to liberal. We'll talk about Janet Protasewicz's victory over Dan Kelly with Politico state politics reporter Zach Montellaro. And we start with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, meeting Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library Museum in Simi Valley, California, joined by more than a dozen other members of Congress, both Republicans and Democrats. Ahead of the meeting, National Review reports that Li Zhang, a diplomat who identified himself as a counselor in the Congressional Affairs section of the Chinese embassy, sent congressional offices a threatening note that read, "I would like to reiterate that the Chinese side strongly opposes any form of official interaction between the U.S. and Taiwan, strongly opposes any visit to the U.S. by the leader of the Taiwan authorities, regardless of the rationale or pretext, and strongly opposes all forms of contact of the U.S. officials with the Taiwan authorities, including Speaker McCarthy's meeting with Tsai Ing-wen, no matter where the meeting takes place." House Speaker McCarthy and the Taiwanese President made joint statements to the press.
Today I'm honored to meet with Taiwan's President Tsai as she transits the United States. Fittingly, our discussion took place here at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. Here at his library, there are countless exhibits that capture President Reagan's patriotic spirit, his belief in democracy, and commitment to the ideas of peace and freedom. Those values have always served as the bedrock of our friendship with the people of Taiwan. And they are more important now than ever before. I believe our bond is stronger now than at any time or point in my lifetime. And of course, President Tsai is a great champion of that bond. Taiwan is a successful democracy, a thriving economy, and a global leader in health and science. And whether it's our deep commercial ties, strong people-to-people relationships, our shared values, our cooperation with the people of Taiwan continue to expand through dialogue and exchange. The friendship between the people of Taiwan and America is a matter of profound importance to the free world, and it is critical to maintain economic freedom, peace, and regional stability. We will honor our obligations and reiterate our commitment to our shared values, behind which all Americans are united. Today was a bipartisan meeting, Republicans and Democrats united together in a place that symbolizes the freedom and the commitment and the bond that's only become stronger with the President with us today. President Tsai?
Thank you. Speaker McCarthy, friends, I am delighted to visit the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library once again, this time with Speaker McCarthy and distinguished members of the Congress. I want to thank Speaker McCarthy for his warm hospitality and for his invitation to bipartisan congressional leaders who have taken time out of their busy schedules to join us today. Their presence and unwavering support reassure the people of Taiwan that we are not isolated and we are not alone. It is especially fitting for us to meet here to pay tribute to a distinguished American president and world leader, a man who also played a crucial role in partnership with the U.S. Congress in protecting and fortifying U.S.-Taiwan relations at a time of changing diplomatic realities. President Reagan's 6 assurances of 1982, on top of the landmark Taiwan Relations Act passed by the Congress, laid the foundation for a strong and unique partnership of over 4 decades, during which we have maintained peace and promoted prosperity and welcomed the advent of Taiwan's democracy. However, it is no secret that today, the peace that we have maintained and the democracy which have worked hard to build are facing unprecedented challenges. We once again find ourselves in a world where democracy is under threat, and the urgency of keeping the beacon of freedom shining cannot be understated. President Reagan said it best: freedom is never more than 1 generation away from extinction. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation. In the discussion with congressional leaders this morning, I reiterated Taiwan's commitment to defending the peaceful status quo, where the people of Taiwan may continue to thrive in a free and open society. I also highlighted a belief which President Reagan championed, that to preserve peace, we must be strong. I would like to add that we are stronger when we are together.
Now more on Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen and U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's meeting, along with other members of Congress of both parties, at the Reagan Presidential Library in California, with Lisa Mascaro, Associated Press Chief Congressional Correspondent. You write that this meeting, quote, is the most sensitive stop on her transit through the U.S. and Central America, a whirlwind diplomatic mission that is delicate, secretive, and politically fraught. What's on the line?
Yes, exactly. You know, these transits, as they are called, these stops through the United States that the Taiwan president has made in the past and is making now, are always very delicate because of the sort of informal relation that the U.S. has with the island government vis-a-vis its relationship with China. And this comes amid the backdrop of, just rising concerns and U.S. attention on China as a, sort of rising leader on the global stage. And so President Tsai had made this transit through the U.S., stopping first in New York last week before heading to Central America, where she is shoring up support for her government, trying to ensure that Taiwan is not isolated as it sort of is confronting Beijing and Beijing's stance toward the island government. Of course, Beijing claims the government, the island, as part of its territory. It's the sort of long-standing one China policy, and though the U.S. does acknowledge that policy, it does not fully accept that is the way the relations are. So this visit carries this enormous backdrop with it. Of course, meeting with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in California was the highest-ranking U.S. official that she did meet with on her trip. And it came in the backdrop of the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California, which also, is a show of U.S. presence there. Speaker McCarthy gathered a bipartisan group of lawmakers there to show support for President Tsai. And this was all done in sort of a very measured but strong presentation at their meeting.
You speak of these diplomatic missions being measured. What's China's reaction and what's the U.S.'s reaction to China's reaction? Are we seeing and hearing words being chosen carefully?
Yes, that is exactly right. China is closely watching this. There was a message sent the night before from the Chinese officials that they were watching this. Of course, today there is some holiday, so there's not a strong response at the moment, though there was an announcement by the Chinese government this morning of some patrols around the waters around Taiwan and the Strait. And the U.S. is always responding both carefully but also independently. Kevin McCarthy saying, he's not trying to change the relationship between the U.S. and China or China and Taiwan, but that, he, as the Speaker of the House, is able to meet with the leader of another government, and that he is able to, show that he does not want to be swayed by China not to have this meeting. So it's, a very, like I say, measured approach, a statement of support for Taiwan without unnecessarily escalating any of the blowback or the potential pushback from China.
Your article at apnews.com, Elisa Mascaro, you wrote, quote, "For the newly elected House Speaker, it is the start of his foray into foreign affairs." Are we seeing or hearing that Speaker McCarthy wants to visit Taiwan, much like former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi did?
Yes, absolutely. This is something that Leader McCarthy had mentioned before. There were no plans immediately underway that we know of for him to make a trip like that. And instead, this transit by the president of Taiwan presented this opportunity to meet here in the United States. And so that was chosen. Of course, former Speaker Pelosi's visit did elicit a strong reaction from China at the time, which made a sort of show of its military force in the region after that visit, and later that year over some other U.S. policies coming from the U.S. Congress. So Speaker McCarthy, he is not known for working a lot in the foreign policy space. Of course, he has done other trips as a American leader abroad in the past before becoming Speaker. He has led delegations of members of Congress to Israel and to Europe. But this is a sort of new position for him as the Speaker of the U.S. House, the second in the line of succession to the American presidency, to take on a sort of greater role in foreign affairs. And it comes at a time, of course, where there is a lot happening on the international stage, of course, with China and Russia and the war in Ukraine. So there is plenty for Speaker McCarthy at a time that's difficult for him. He had a hard time becoming Speaker, drawing support from his own Republican Party in that, very grueling race to become Speaker at the start of the year. And the Republican Party does have splinters on this issue of how involved to be in foreign affairs. There's a bit of a neo-isolationist wing to the Republican Party. But Leader McCarthy, he's a son of California. As someone said, he sort of grew up in the, background of the Reagan ranch in California. He grew up in that generation of sort of Reagan Republicans. And I think that will be something of a star for him to follow, a sort of a position for him to follow as he tries to carve out this foreign policy lane as part of his role as the U.S. House Speaker.
The title of the article at apnews.com, For McCarthy and Taiwan's Leader Visit Marks Historic First, by Lisa Mascaro, Associated Press Chief Congressional Correspondent. Thank you so much for helping us make sense of these diplomatic missions.
You bet. Thanks so much for having me.
And today's meeting does make Speaker McCarthy the highest-ranking official to meet with Taiwan's president on U.S. soil since 1979, the year Washington established diplomatic relations with China. As Lisa Mascaro, the reporter, mentioned, China responded to the visit by then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan last August with its largest live-fire drills in decades, including firing a missile over Taiwan. Well, today there were reports of some stepped-up military activity by China around Taiwan. Some questions about it to the Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh.
China and U.S. officials have both acknowledged that there's an aircraft carrier that China has placed in close proximity to the island at this point. Does the Pentagon have any concern about that? Is there any communication about that? And then I hear you saying that Chinese should not be responding to this in any kind of aggressive way. But that doesn't mean they won't. What kind of Pentagon preparations are underway for that?
Thanks, Dan. So I've seen the reporting that, and I believe that there are additional carriers operating within the Taiwan Strait or nearby. These naval operations are happening in international waters. It's something that we do on routine and do exercises within international waters. But again, we don't see any reason for China to overreact or to take this transit as a pretext for any aggression. Again, this is something that we've seen before. President Tsai has transited the United States before. This does not go against our one China policy. And so I don't want to get into hypotheticals on, what would the United States do if something were to happen. Again, we don't see this transit as a reason for any pretext that China should use for any additional aggression.
The Pentagon Principal Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh taking reporters' questions in the Pentagon briefing room. The Taiwan president is officially transiting through New York City and Los Angeles on a trip to and from Central American countries, and a transit visa is a temporary travel authorization given by the State Department that lets passengers pass through a foreign country to get to another country. So in this case, President Taiwan not making an official visit to the United States. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also asked by a reporter about any concerns over China's potential reaction.
With regard to President Tsai's transit of the United States, I think the first thing to emphasize is that these transits by high-level Taiwanese authorities are nothing new. They're private, they're unofficial, but they've been going on for years, and President Tsai and her predecessors have done the same thing. In fact, every Taiwan president has transited the United States at one point or another. The meetings, the engagements that the president has also are very much in line with precedent. And similarly, our own approach to Taiwan has remained very consistent and unchanged, including our adherence to the One China policy, guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, 3 communiques, the 6 assurances, our opposition to any unilateral changes in the status quo by either side. So it's a long way of saying that, given that, Beijing should not use the transits as an excuse to take any actions, to ratchet up tensions, to further push at changing the status quo. And our objective remains the same: to have peace, to have stability, across the Taiwan Strait, and to ensure that any differences that exist between mainland and Taiwan are resolved peacefully.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken with reporters at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. An article at China Daily, the English-language newspaper owned by the Central Propaganda Department of the Chinese Communist Party, highlights what it describes as a crowd of protesters in front of a hotel where Tsai Ing-wen, leader of the Taiwan region, was expected to stay, and that one protester, the paper said, drove from Mexico to hold a sign saying, "We want peace, but Tsai does not," and telling the paper that he was worried that Tsai's stopover in the city and her reported meeting with the United States officials would damage relations across the Taiwan Straits as well as China-U.S. ties. There was a quote from this protester in the China Daily newspaper: "We don't want to see peace and stability being damaged, so we must strongly oppose her visit." This is Washington Today. More from Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He also said today that he has no doubt that Wall Street Journal reporter, American Evan Gershkovich, is being wrongfully detained in Russia on suspicion of spying for the U.S. government. But the U.S. is working through the formal process to determine whether wrongfully detained is the proper designation. If Evan Gershkovich is convicted of espionage, he could face up to 20 years in Russian prison. Here's Secretary Blinken.
We'll first go to Vivian Salama with the Wall Street Journal.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mr. Secretary. I want to ask you about my colleague, Evan Gershkovich, who as of today has been detained in Russia for the last week. It feels like a year. Do you anticipate that you will approve a designation of wrongfully detained for Evan, or do you need to wait however long it will take for the Russians to agree to grant him consular access for that to even happen? And secondly, prisoner swaps have occurred in recent years to bring a number of detained Americans home. Is there anyone that the Russians want or would be willing to exchange either for Evan or for Paul Whelan, who's also being held on espionage charges? And more broadly, are you concerned that there is a precedent being set now by our adversaries who are detaining Americans in the hope that maybe they would get some sort of prisoner swap in return? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vivian. First, and you've heard me say this before, from my perspective, from the department's perspective, there is no higher priority than the safety and security of American citizens around the world, and that includes those who may be wrongfully detained, held hostage, otherwise kept from coming home, being with their families. In Evan's case, we are working through the determination on wrongful detention, and there's a process to do that. And it's something that we're working through very deliberately, but expeditiously as well. And I'll let that process play out. In my own mind, there's no doubt that he's being wrongfully detained by Russia, which is exactly what I said to Foreign Minister Lavrov when I spoke to him over the weekend, and insisted that Evan be released immediately. But I want to make sure that, as always, because there is a formal process, that we go through it, and we will, and I expect that to be completed soon. More broadly, when it comes, first of all, to Paul Whelan, as I've also said, there's a proposal on the table that's been on the table for some months. Again, with Foreign Minister Lavrov, I reiterated that Russia should move on that proposal so that we can bring Paul home. In any of these instances, there is a balance to be done between trying to bring home people who are being unjustly detained in one way or another and what it takes to do that. I believe that, as we've demonstrated in the past, and as a result as well of legislation that we have and other tools that we have, that even as we engage in efforts to bring people home, we can also increase the pressure and increase the penalties on those who would engage in the practice of unlawful arbitrary detention of American citizens. And that's what we've been doing, including, for example, implementing the Robert Levinson Act and other tools that we have.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken, news conference today during his visit to NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. A New York Post article explains the wrongful detention declaration would boost the 31-year-old journalist's case to the State Department's Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, which helps negotiate the release of hostages and other Americans deemed to be wrongfully detained in other countries. This article from CNN, Israeli police stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, one of Islam's holiest sites, during Ramadan prayers early Wednesday, arresting hundreds of Palestinians and sparking retaliatory rocket fire from militants in Gaza. Footage shared on social media showed Israeli officers striking screaming people with batons inside the darkened building. Eyewitnesses told CNN that police had smashed doors and windows to enter the mosque and deployed stun grenades and rubber bullets once inside. Videos shared by Israeli police show forces holding riot shields up as fireworks were launched back at them, ricocheting off the walls. Israeli police said in a statement that its forces entered Al-Aqsa after hundreds of rioters and mosque desecrators had barricaded themselves inside. Some U.S. reaction today from John Kirby, a spokesperson for the White House National Security Council.
We'll go next to Nadia with Al Arabia.
Hi, thanks. Hi, John. Since you expressed worries about what's happening in the Aqsa Mosque, will the U.S. push for tangible action at the UN Security Council tomorrow? And why there was no U.S. condemnation of the Israeli attack on Palestinian worshippers and the arrest of more than 500 Palestinians in one of the holiest sites of Islam in the holiest month of the year, which is the month of Ramadan? Palestinians say if it was the reverse, the U.S. condemnation will be quick. How do you respond to that?
I think we have a very strong track record of speaking out against violence all around the world and the death and injury caused to people of all faiths. We have a very strong track record of that, and I said right at the beginning of this that we're still very concerned about this violence and urging all sides to avoid further escalation. So I think we've been very clear about that.
John Kirby, a strategic communications coordinator for the White House National Security Council, speaking to reporters in a virtual audio-only news conference. The Jewish holiday of Passover starts sundown tonight. President Biden tweeting, "As we celebrate Passover, let's remember that despite our differences, we sit at the same table as one people, one nation, one America. Let us join hands across faiths, races, and backgrounds to make clear that evil will not win. Anti-Semitism will not be the story of our time." More from the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
I want to wish a happy Passover to Jewish Americans in communities across the country who will gather around the Seder table tonight. As the President said today, Passover is more than just recounting of the past. It reminds us of our moral obligation of state clearly and forcefully that anti-Semitism must stop. Passover is also a story of redemption, resilience, and unity, a story of people coming together with a shared faith and a shared people for a better tomorrow.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at the start of her daily news conference in the White House briefing room. Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican from Nebraska, posting this video.
Hi, this is Senator Pete Ricketts from the great state of Nebraska. Tonight, Jewish communities in America, Israel, and around the world will celebrate Passover. The Festival of Freedom commemorates the exodus of the enslaved Israelites from Egypt. For millennia, the Jewish people have celebrated Passover in frequent fear of persecution. Passover is a time to reflect on the past and to celebrate freedom and faith. It is also a time to reflect on our freedoms here at home. I'm thankful that we live in a country where all Americans can practice their faith freely and openly. But we must stand vigilant to protect that religious freedom each and every day. To all of those this evening around the Seder table, my family and I wish you a joyous and happy Passover. May God bless our great state of Nebraska, and may God continue to bless our great nation.
Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican from Nebraska, a video tweet. Wall Street today, the Dow up 80, NASDAQ down 129, S&P down 10. Washington today continues in a moment.
There are a lot of places to get political information, but only at C-SPAN do you get it straight from the source. No matter where you are from or where you stand on the issues, C-SPAN is America's network. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. If it happens here, or here, or here, or anywhere that matters, America is watching on C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now app. A few more headlines. A spokesman for former Vice President Mike Pence says he will not appeal a judge's order requiring him to testify before a federal grand jury in the Justice Department's investigation into efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Justice Department today reaching a tentative settlement agreement with the victims of a 2017 mass shooting in Sutherland Springs, Texas, at a church. The judgment, $144.5 million. A judge found the government 60% responsible for the attack after the Air Force failed to report the criminal history to the FBI of the shooter, a former member of the Air Force who killed 26 people and wounded 22 more. And the United Nations says it cannot accept a Taliban decision to ban Afghan female staffers from working at the UN, calling it an unparalleled violation of women's rights, a flagrant breach of humanitarian principles, and a breach of international rules. Yesterday, the UN mission in Afghanistan expressed concern that its female staffers were prevented from reporting to work in an eastern province. This from the Chicago Sun-Times. Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson, a paid organizer for the Chicago Teachers Union, will become Chicago's 57th mayor. After an exhausting 5-week battle for the heart and soul of Chicago, Johnson narrowly defeated former Chicago Public Schools CEO Paul Vallas. Well, both candidates are Democrats, many news organizations describing Brandon Johnson as more progressive than Paul Vallas, especially on the issue of fighting crime. Tuesday's election was a runoff after they were the top 2 vote-getters in the first round. Brandon Johnson speaking to his supporters Tuesday night.
Chicago, tonight is just the beginning. With our voices and our votes, we have ushered in a new chapter in the history of our city. The truth is, the people have always worked for Chicago. Whether you wake up early to open the doors of your businesses, or teach middle school, or wear a badge to protect our streets, or nurse patients in need, or provide child care services, you have always worked for this city. And now Chicago will begin to work for its people, all the people. Because tonight is a gateway to a new future for our city. A city where you can thrive regardless of who you love or how much money you have in your bank account. A city that's truly safer for everyone by investing in what actually works to prevent crime. And that means youth employment, mental health centers, ensuring that law enforcement has the resources to solve and prevent crime. A city that actually respects the workers who keep it running and supports the entrepreneurs that keep it growing. A city where trains run on time and where no one is too poor to live in one of the richest cities, in one of the wealthiest nations, at the richest time in the history of the world. A city where public schools have the resources to meet the needs of every child across this city. Now, in other words, tonight is the beginning of a Chicago that truly invests in all of its people.
Chicago Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson at Tuesday night's victory party, that audio from Fox 32 in Chicago. He also noted that his election came on the anniversary of the assassination of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who he said organized for justice in Chicago, dreaming that one day the civil rights movement and the labor rights movement would come together. Brandon Johnson saying that is what happened with his election. And, quote, "We are experiencing the very dream of the greatest man who ever walked the earth." The person he defeated in Tuesday's Chicago mayor runoff election, Paul Vallas spoke to his reporters as well as the results came in.
I want to thank each and every one of you who have cast their vote in support of me. Our journey over the last 10 months would not have been possible without you. Day in and day out, I've been energized by your enthusiasm to help us reach our ultimate goal of bringing our city back together and getting our city on track. We ran an issue-oriented campaign, which is the only campaign I know how to run. Issues important to everyday Chicagoans across our city. I put out a public safety first plan in this campaign because public safety is a fundamental right. Without it, we will continue to be defined more by our differences than by what we yearn for in common. The only pathway forward in our great city is together. Whether it's quality schools, affordable or equitable economic development, the solutions we adopt and implement must work for all Chicagoans. I am proud that we have built a diverse coalition over the past 10 months, a coalition that has spanned across this great city and encapsulates the various cultures, languages, and ideologies that make Chicago so unique and so great. It's time for all Chicagoans to put aside their differences and to walk and to work together, supporting the daunting work ahead for our next mayor. I am optimistic that better, brighter days are on the horizon.
Paul Vallas Tuesday night after losing the Chicago mayor's race. That audio from ABC 7 Chicago. More from the Chicago Sun-Times article. With 99.6% of precincts reporting, Brandon Johnson had 51.42% of the vote to 48.58% for Paul Vallas. That's a margin of 15,872 votes out of more than 550,000 cast. And they note, though 90,000 mail-in ballots remain uncounted, Paul Vallas did not hold out for a full count that would have dragged Election Day into Easter weekend. Brandon Johnson will be sworn in on May 15th, taking over for the Democratic incumbent, Lori Lightfoot, who ran and lost re-election in the first round of voting. Now to Wisconsin. From the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Wisconsin voters on Tuesday gave control of the state's highest court to liberals for the first time in 15 years, instantly reshaping politics in the Badger State by putting the state laws most celebrated by conservatives at risk of being overturned, including a 19th century-era ban on abortions. Milwaukee County Judge Janet Protasewicz defeated former Supreme Court Justice Dan Kelly in a race that served as a referendum on the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, shattering national spending records and attracting a level of political warfare unseen before in a state judicial race. That from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Here is the winner celebrating at the victory party Tuesday night.
Today's results mean two very important and special things. First, it means that Wisconsin voters have made their voices heard. Yes. They've chosen to reject partisan extremism in this state. And second, it means our democracy will always prevail. Too many have tried to overturn the will of the people. Today's results show that Wisconsinites believe in democracy and the democratic process. Today, I'm proud to stand by the promise I've made to every Wisconsinite that I will always deliver justice and bring common sense to our Supreme Court. This is a victory for all of us. You have entrusted me with great responsibility, and I will treat the role with the highest degree of integrity. I will bring the fairness and impartiality that you have all been waiting for. And I will be a part of the solution to make our Supreme Court, along with my soon-to-be new colleagues, right here, something that you will always feel proud of. As you all know, our state motto is forward. And today I am proud that we are going to be able to live up to our motto. Our state is taking a step forward to a better and brighter future where our rights and freedoms will be protected.
Janet Protasewicz Tuesday night after beating Dan Kelly for that seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Conservative-leaning justices currently hold a 4-3 majority on the court, and Protasewicz will fill the seat being vacated by a retiring conservative justice that would flip the balance to the liberal side, 4-3. Dan Kelly telling his supporters Tuesday night he accepts the results but cannot congratulate his opponent.
I wish that in a circumstance like this, I would be able to concede to a worthy opponent. But I do not have a worthy opponent to which I can concede. This was the most deeply deceitful, dishonorable, despicable campaign I have ever seen run for the courts. It was truly beneath contempt. Now I say this not because we did not prevail. I do not say this because of the rancid slanders that were launched against me, although that was bad enough. But that is not my concern. My concern is the damage done to the institution of the court.
Yes.
My opponent is a serial liar.
Yep.
She's disregarded judicial ethics.
Yep.
She's demeaned the judiciary with her behavior. And this is the future that we have to look forward to in Wisconsin. I have been committed to the rule of law my entire career. I understand this to be the most fundamental, basic promise of civilization. And at its heart, it lives in the judiciary, and if not there, nowhere at all. We've had this laid out plainly for us. We could have the rule of law or the rule of Janet. But the people of Wisconsin have chosen the rule of Janet.
Dan Kelly Tuesday night after losing the race for Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice to Janet Protasewicz. Zach Montellaro, Politico state politics reporter, has been following this election and joins us now by phone. Thank you for being with us. It's not often a race like this makes headlines within a state, let alone nationally. Why did that happen? What was at stake?
Yeah, it's really a two-track thing here. That one, all the attention used to be on federal races, president, senator, maybe your House of Representatives. But as we've seen over the last, 6 years, that's trickling down to state races, governors, certainly, secretaries of state, attorneys general, and now state Supreme Court races. So it's just a general trend of moving in that direction, combined with the fact that this was an incredibly consequential election for Wisconsin. This election decided the ideological balance of the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, at least for the next couple of years, if not longer. And that court is going to probably weigh in on everything from abortion rights in the state to redistricting to labor rights. It was just everything was on the line in this election. And there's been this trend of accelerating attention for state elections anyway, that it's just created the perfect storm.
And also, it highlights the role of the judiciary and how that might be changing. You have a state in Wisconsin where there seems to be partisan gridlock between the legislature and the executive, putting more focus on the judges.
Yeah, Wisconsin is a state that has a Democratic governor, Tony Evers. He's now in his second term. But despite the fact it's a pretty close to 50-50 state in most statewide races, I guess yesterday being the exception, that was more of a blowout. Republicans have, a deadlock on the legislature there. It's close to a supermajority in both chambers. Republicans have it in one chamber and are just a couple seats short in the state house, meaning a lot of things end up in the courts eventually. In Wisconsin, first and foremost is going to likely be some sort of redistricting lawsuits, almost assuredly going to come down the road, challenging those maps that Republicans effectively drew for themselves after, a convoluted redistricting process that these maps favored Republicans and they have for the last decade. But things like abortion, when Roe was overturned at the federal level by the U.S. Supreme Court, that kicked the issue to the states. And because Governor Evers and the Republican legislature disagreed quite strongly, we'll say, on, access to abortion in the state, that old law that banned abortion in Wisconsin, from the 1800s is still on the books, and there's a legal battle fighting about that law. So all the attention for abortion hasn't gone to the governor's race, hasn't gone to the legislature. It's gone to this state Supreme Court race instead.
We're talking with Zach Montellaro from Politico. Was this an unusual judicial race in Wisconsin for Supreme Court justice? You had one candidate talking specifically about issues and the losing candidate calling his opponent despicable. Is that just typical now, or was this a one-off?
I don't think it's been typical for the past, but I think this might be increasingly the direction that judicial races, not just in Wisconsin, but nationally, kind of end up going. In the not too distant past, there was some degree of partisan, separation with judicial races in Wisconsin. It's technically a nonpartisan position. Democrats lined up behind Justice-elect Protasiewicz, Republicans behind, the former Justice Kelly. But, it wasn't a one-to-one prediction, basically, that if you voted for Joe Biden for president, didn't necessarily mean you're going to vote for Janet Protasiewicz, or, if you voted for Donald Trump, didn't necessarily mean you voted for Justice Kelly in the past. That's not true anymore. With all this money flowing into this judicial race, and I suspect future state Supreme Court races, not just in Wisconsin, but in other key battleground states, we're going to see these track more and more with partisan fights than in years past. If states didn't already have partisan justices, in Pennsylvania, they are elected on a party line. In North Carolina, they are recently elected on a party line, and Republicans just flipped the North Carolina State Supreme Court in the midterms, and that was a big win for them. So in the past, judicial races may have been a little bit more stoic, we'll say, but going forward, I think they'll just track like any other statewide, race, like a governor's race, like maybe a Senate, or a House race in a battleground seat.
And you mentioned this is a presidential battleground state. You've said it a couple of times. What does that mean? What type of focus are the national candidates giving to it?
Interesting. That was the one thing that didn't happen all that much was that President Trump sat out the Wisconsin, or former President Trump, I should say, sat out the Wisconsin race. President Biden did not endorse in the race, even though, national parties were driving in one direction. The one piece missing that's not exactly like a Senate race, not exactly like a governor's race maybe, was that national surrogacy coming in. That's not to say nobody showed up. Former Attorney General Eric Holder, who's who's still very involved in Democratic politics. He runs the Democrats' main redistricting group. He was in Wisconsin, but the one piece missing, the one thing we're not seeing, is the complete and total nationalization of the race, where a Trump-like figure or Trump himself or Biden himself could come in. That's not always the case. There has been state Supreme Court races in the past where Trump got involved, but this time, this go around, there was no Trump, there was no Governor DeSantis, there was no Joe Biden, there was no broadly national figures making that last second stop that we probably are going to see for other competitive races down the road.
Zach Montellaro, Politico state politics reporter. Find his stories at Politico.com, and on Twitter it's at Zach Montellaro. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And the Associated Press reporting that spending on this high-stakes Wisconsin Supreme Court race topped $42 million, nearly triple the previous national record for a court race. Janet Protasiewicz defeating Dan Kelly 55.5% to 44.5%. President Biden is taking a trip to Ireland and the United Kingdom. Some details from the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
So today we announced that President Biden will travel next week to the United Kingdom and Ireland. He will head first to travel to Belfast. That'll be his first stop, where he will mark the tremendous progress since the signing of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement 25 years ago, and underscore the readiness of the United States to support Northern Ireland's vast economic potential to the benefit of all communities. Next, the president will travel to Ireland, where he will discuss our close cooperation on the full range of shared global challenges. He will also hold various engagements, including Dublin, County Louth in County Mayo and celebrate the deep historic ties that link our countries and people.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at her briefing with reporters. She also said that Great Britain's King Charles III has invited President Biden to make an official state visit to the United Kingdom, and that President Biden has accepted, and it will be in, quote, the near future. King Charles's coronation will be on May 6th. First Lady Jill Biden will be leading the U.S. delegation. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.